Oops. There we go. So tell me how you listened this week.
Sure.
What was it you heard? Especially, remember, you were listening to other people's voices, which can sometimes be scary, can often sometimes be very illuminating. Who did you listen to and what did you hear?
Well, I got the rare treat of getting to spend, I think it was 2 hours. It went so fast, it didn't seem like more than 15 minutes, but talking with one of my dearest friends for a long time, and she and I are about the same age. And so we just had one of those lingering, winding conversations that took us in a lot of different directions through our own personal history and our shared histories. And it was just delicious.
Refreshing.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I had another session where I put myself in the position of being the listener, because that felt like the person needed to be heard. But my favorite thing was checking out at the grocery store, and there was a sale on hand lotion that I liked, and so I bought several. And the cashier said, "Oh, I need to get some of this." And I said, "Well, just take one of mine." That's fine. And she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yeah." So she had lotion. And then she went on to say how depressing it has been for her to work this last year. And told me about her relationships. And I mean, it just opened a whole, I don't know quite what to call it, mosaic of conversation from her that she'd been eager to tell somebody, I guess.
Yeah.
And I happen to be it.
It's not a bad thing to be for someone.
No, but are really hungry right now to talk.
Yeah. Well, and
I
for a
don't
lot
like
of
that.
different reasons. One of the ways I listened happened actually last night. And you know, I'm busy last night. I had meetings and whatnot. And then I heard that Janet Thompson had lost her puppy dog. So we're just over a year since she lost her husband. And, you know, I've been trying to keep in contact with her. And I go, man, that's kind of imposing today. And yet that's sometimes the type of moments when we really need to listen, right? And choose to listen, because those other voices will sometimes, like the one in your life, Judy, will sometimes impose. And it's not because we don't want to, it's just sometimes it's not the convenient moment. Catherine, how about you? How did you listen?
Well, I always have a weekly conversation with my sister. It's like our tradition for Saturday mornings, and the topics are varied and very wide ranging. And so I found that sometimes it's better than others when it's family. And but it felt, I think I want to use the word balance. And I always have lots to share, and she does too in her own way. And then we delve into memories and one thing and another. So that is a source of delight to me, because she's not just my sister, she's my friend also. And then the other listening had to do with my son and my youngest one, who's got a lot on his plate right now. He's the one that lives in the middle of nowhere in Libby, Montana, but he's going to be moving, which I'm really excited about, to outside of Salt Lake. So there's a lot of activity going on, but he's taken lately what I consider to be pains, and I don't know if that's the right word. Well, I'll use it. but he's really made an effort to connect with me. And I think that I'm doing a great deal better listening and really being present to him. And so I'm finding much more value in my communication with my youngest son as a result. And I'm really, it makes me feel good in my heart.
Mhm. And just Catherine, you point out a really important thing about other people is that sometimes they will send some type of message, sometimes very small, that says, if you'll listen to this little thing, then maybe I'll step closer to you. And they're kind of testing whether or not we're going to be listeners, right?
He's rather curious. He told me that my message on my phone was too long. So I took it in good stride and I thought, yeah, it is. I don't need to be so wordy. So I cut it down and then it was good because he did notice, because when he happened to call and could leave a message, I got positive affirmation.
Yeah, no, that's good.
So you can teach an old girl a few new tricks here and there.
Absolutely. Even the real obstinate ones, like the other two in this conversation.
Yeah. Wait a minute. I have to put at the top of that list. I can't believe that Nancy or Judy are obstinate women. I just can't buy that.
Oh, you don't know.
Thank you, Catherine.
You know, the difficulty of listening when you're older, though, is that you've already listened a lot. And you have a lot of stuff in your backpack, so to speak. And so you have to kind of decide, do I have the time, the space to be able to listen to one more thing? And we always do, but I think you have to kind of decide that. Because you got lots of wisdom.
My son is really a great teacher. He's my youngest and he's an old soul. And well, I find all my children delightful in their own way and quirky. And but he has a good way of communicating with me because he's real direct. And I like that part. And I tend to, strange as it may seem, meander in my verbalization. You've probably noticed it. And
not that we were going to mention.
No, you're tactful. But I'm kind of circular because eventually I'll get back to the point, but I might dally in a lot of spots like I'm doing now. So I'll get right to it and say that he's good about giving me a clue when it's like, okay, I'm running out of juice, meaning the phone. So sometimes I don't want to hear that, but I'm trying to be better about that too, and go, yeah, glad to connect, and we could talk, catch you later, and head it off right then and there. So, he's a good teacher, persistent.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Nancy, any listening you did?
Well, I heard this pastor on Sunday and he was
Be
talking.
careful of what you listen to.
I know. He mentioned a book by Anne Lamott, Dusk, Night, Dawn. And so I ordered it and I've been reading that. So I've enjoyed that. This guy also talked about having bigger dreams. And so I've been kind of playing with that idea. Like, well, what dream do I have and how could I make it larger? And just like using my imagination. One of the quotes from the chapter was, imagination is a wonderful thing. And I think we need to use it. And I think that sometimes I was talking to Jim before you all came on, how we can be more playful with our higher self. Doesn't have to always be so serious and in our head. And so I'm getting off the original question, but that's okay. We talk about having angels on our shoulders. So I had this little angel that I thought would fit nicely here. And, you know, Mike and I sometimes will talk about what would Jim do? Choose love. And
Oh,
So that
so
you can do
he
the
says-
opposite, obviously.
no, that whole idea of choosing love. And I love to like throw that out to certain people I live with, you know, like, excuse me, choose love. That doesn't always go over real well. Or if I say something like, could you please listen to me? And he said this once. He goes, yeah, I've been listening to you for like 41 years. It's like, whoa.
wait, who's
Yeah.
counting though? Who's counting,
Yeah.
right?
I know. I thought that was,
Well,
well, it
and-
goes both ways, you know.
Sure. And the hard part about listening that way is that that person who you've been listening to for 41 years, whose sentences you can sometimes finish, also means that sometimes you're not listening to them when they're speaking right now, maybe in a different and a new way that they
There you
really
go.
need you to hear.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bring that up again. Well,
Yeah.
this is what Jim said. Yeah.
But
So-
that's always the issue, you know, because you don't have to listen in the same way to someone you've known a long time, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that might be the challenge.
Jim, I think we have to begin to refer to you as the Oracle on the Hill.
Oh, I don't know about that.
So let's delve into our book, which
Yeah, that's what I was
talks
gonna say.
about, we want to spend some time with this first section. And it's not a short section. It's called The Still Small Voice. And I've that's a phrase that I've known my whole life. All right. Mormons talk a lot about the still small voice. The question is always not, have we heard that, but do we listen to it? And for them, the still small voice is spirit. Today, we're going to do it saying it is your voice. Because Judy, you've talked to me before about how there's a lot of voices around your household sometimes.
Yep.
And how do you, in the midst of all those voices, figure out how to listen to the one that's inside of you? How do you quell the stuff around you? And it's not necessarily we're not necessarily making judgments about those other voices. We are saying, in the midst of those other voices, how do you hear that one voice inside of you? Anybody have problems with that ever?
Sometimes I have to go in the car
Uh-huh.
and just drive around the block or something.
Yeah. And sometimes that comes because, not just because they're always there, but for example, Joni likes to do things together. That's not a bad thing. I like doing things with her. But sometimes if I'm only doing things with her, we hear each other's voices rather than listening to the voice inside of each other. I think that's one of the reasons why the author says very clearly, those walks you take on your own,
Yeah.
right? So you begin learning to listen to a different voice.
I was going to mention that instead of a still small voice, sometimes you get a loud, active voice.
Yeah.
That just kind of yells at you, wrong way, don't go there, or go there. You know, when in the opening, Judy and Catherine, you've read chapter 3, true?
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, good. She talks about tools in the beginning, and she mentions Obi-Wan Kenobi and prayer and writing questions, and the believing mirrors come up again as the higher self, and the inner elder, which I like that
Yeah.
phrase, inner elder, and then I even added Yoda to that. But that she starts off with. Jim, did you want to say something about Obi-Wan Kenobi?
I think Yoda, Obi-Wan, Glinda the Good Witch she mentioned, what you have to do is you have to give a value to that voice inside of you. not as the value of the one who used to be present for you. That's a different thing. But, you know, Obi-Wan becomes that which continues to speak, even though is gone. Our elder needs to speak, right? The one who sees things from a wiser place than whatever it is, wherever it is that we are right now. And not that we're not wise in our right nows, but the right nows get in the way of seeing the wisest space sometimes. And so that inner elder is the that wider view. I will say too that sometimes it's your younger self that is the wise elder, right? Because the younger self sometimes has less fear, maybe less inhibitions, less worry about things. And so sometimes what that wise elder is saying is, remember what you used to be, right? And resurrect some of that. And so the wise elder takes on a lot of different personalities. The question is, why don't you listen to it? Sometimes it's because you don't hear it in the clamor of things. Sometimes you don't want to listen to it because it's saying, jump off the cliff. Not literally. I mean, but it feels like it in the moment, doesn't it? Go ahead and do that. You're okay. You'll survive whatever that challenge is. And our safe selves want to not listen. Let me give you an example. 3 or 4 years ago, I took the youth down to San Luis, Mexico. We helped build a house down there. It was a wonderful experience. I loved that moment. And on the way back, and I've gone to San Luis 100 times, right? And I've gotten to where I know how long the line is by which avenue. And we were way back. We were on Avenue 20. 20 is about 2.5 hours wait. It's a long wait from there. And I was dreading it, first of all, because I had a whole bunch of youth in the car, right? And I have to sit at the line. But also, I don't usually get cell phone reception until I get to Somerton, which is about 10 miles on the other side of the border. But all of a sudden, I'm sitting there and my phone rings. And it's Joni on the phone. And I go, wow, this isn't unusual. I talk to her, and the inner elder that her voice invoked in me was, listen to this person who's talking to you. And essentially, I bought a house while waiting in line. Right? Because I trusted the woman who was saying, I found a house for us. We'd already kind of started the process. Do I trust that jump off the cliff moment? How about you? Where has your inner elder or inner child spoken to you to give you advice and draw you forward?
Well, I can add to the house idea. When I walked into this house, I was alone and I was the scout, and I instantly knew, oh, this is it. And we've been looking for a year. And I came home and told that to Mike, and he trusts me, and he went and saw it. But that was a gut feeling. Just as when I got married to Mike, I remember feeling very peaceful before the wedding and knowing in my gut that this was the right way to go. He was more nervous than I was.
Oh, no, we understand that. Just kidding, Nancy.
I know, but he'd never been married before, whereas I had. And funny thing on that first marriage, I wrote in my diary 2 weeks before, I hope this doesn't end in divorce. Like, premonition. And so I don't know. I just, sometimes just trusting your gut and how you feel, for me, it's pretty accurate, pretty, 95%. I mean, I don't know, I'm guessing, but seems to work pretty well. What about you, Catherine? Have you had any of those feelings, gut feelings about whatever?
Yeah, and I think it's developed over time. As I'm thinking about it, that I have, I guess taken on certain mantles, and one of them is being a crone, and just being comfortable with that, and to really like that part of me, and I like that term, the elder,
Mhm.
and to trust it, and I try to tell other people about it and encourage people to listen and then act. And because I always say it will never steer you wrong. It's impossible to, when it really is what it is, that voice within, it's always got your best, your back and your best interests at heart. Totally.
Yeah. And part of what helps is if we remember the moments when we didn't listen to it, and later on we saw what could have happened. So like with that call with Janet that I told you about, I've learned to when someone crosses my mind, to try to make that call. And partially it's because those moments when I didn't, right? And I said, oh, later on I heard this was going on in so-and-so's life. And if I'd listened to the voice, I could have been there in those moments. So it's not wrong that you failed to listen in the past, as long as you try to use that failure to help you listen better now.
Well, don't you think it was? I mean, when I heard what the story, I'm thinking you had to listen. You were a captive.
It does help when you're stuck like that.
And it was propitious, because what she did have to say was really important, and she could have your undivided attention.
Yeah. Well, and my first instinct was to do the same type of thing we often do. I knew that typically the reception was very bad there. And so I said, why even start the conversation? We won't be able to finish it. And yet we could. And we had no problem with the reception. But your past experience tells you this is what will happen. And so you stop yourself from listening, right? Instead of trusting. And she said an important thing about trust. What was it she said? That we must trust what we hear. We have to get used to, as we're seeking for that guidance, not all of a sudden explain the guidance away, right? How many have known the right thing to do, but convinced yourself not to anyway? Do we listen to that guidance and actually follow it?
Well, speaking for myself, I often get guidance in the morning. And this morning, my guidance was about, and I'm jumping ahead here, but when she talks about painter as listener, is that okay, Jim, to jump over there?
Yeah, jump to there. Yeah.
Okay, that's on page 132, if you want to look at that. She talks with a painter who says her practice is to sit, breathe, and listen. My writing is an art form meant to be shared. And I put ink pen to the paper and listen to hear the words and write what I hear. So this morning, what I kind of heard in my mind was images help to give a voice. So my image was this angel. So rather than a higher self, it was something three-dimensional that I could then draw. So I drew this chalk drawing of the angel, and then it took a form. And then when I was mentioning this to Jim this morning, he said, well, in the medieval churches, people couldn't read or write, so they used images to tell Jesus's story, you know, the Stations of the Cross and what have you. So I just wanted to put it out there that if any of you want to put your higher self as an image that you could draw or paint, that might be something that could be homework that you could share next week if that's something you're drawn to, literally drawn to. Anyway, yeah, so for me, that helps to put an image to something other than just a thought of an inner elder. Can be something I look at.
And I think what helps about that is that it reminds us, okay, that image of an icon, right? The higher self is about saying this present moment self, whatever wonder there is in this present moment self, that it doesn't have to be perfect, that it can hear better and differently than just that. And so that's part of what you have to do is make sure that you understand that this is not your only iteration of self. And this piece doesn't understand this situation with perfect clarity. And
you want to throw in what you mentioned to me about the graven image and not praying to that?
Oh yeah, what you have to remember is that any image that is made, the idea of don't make any graven image is about trying to encapsulate the God voice and say this is all it ever looks like. And the reality is the same thing is true about your voice. Your voice doesn't have a singular, this is the right answer all the time, everywhere, right? Solid, no questioning type of thing. It's a fluid thing that continues to speak in different ways. That the answer that was yesterday's right answer today might not be giving the same clarity. And can you be open enough, flexible enough to be able to hear today's voice? And so you don't want to graven image it that says that's the only way I can look at something.
Or just that the statue becomes like a god. It's just no.
Yeah, you don't want to make anything like that into a god. You want to listening this way, and listening to self is listening to, continuing to listen, continuing to be open. So let me say it this way, because it's not just that, but also it's how we listen to other people. How many have had some really great teachers in your life? Mm-hmm. Right? You should listen to those. That's what last week's chapter was about. But I saw a story this week, and I'm going to share it tomorrow. So I'm sorry if you're coming to tonight. If you're coming to the service tonight, you'll know at least one of the stories I'm telling. But I'm going to start it ahead of time. And it's about a man who is hired to train horses, and he's a magnificent trainer, does a good job with them, until the king realizes that each of his horses is developing a limp. And so he calls the trainer in, and the trainer enters the courtroom limping in. And he realizes that the horses are emulating the trainer, the good trainer that he is. And so we all have to look at our trainers, those wonderful voices, and try not to emulate their limps, right? Whatever we do learn from them, also hear beyond that. There is no perfect trainer. There are those where we draw from, but what we're trying to figure out ultimately is not what so-and-so magnificent voice said, but what does that mean for my voice? I think one of the worst things we do is when we just copy someone else's voice because it was so good. We have to speak our voice, our voice that is placed inside of us, not just repeat someone else's voice. Because that other person already said that other thing. What's your voice?
I think, Tim, one of the things I'm just realizing that makes me hesitant to claim that voice is that there are people who say, who excuse their behavior under the guise of God told me.
I have that same fear.
And it just makes me really uneasy to say out loud, well, I had guidance to do this. Even though I go by guidance a lot, I'm not very public about that, I think. Partly because there are people who do really bad things and say, God told them to do it. And it's, or they use that as a way to legitimize kind of bullying behavior. And so those things really give me pause about claiming my own voice with any.
I think it helps, Judy, if we keep it in the perspective of a continual listening. Okay, so yesterday that voice told you this, but am I listening today to that voice? Because they might say yesterday you were an idiot, right? So listen again. So let me give you an example of that. How many have taken the Myers-Briggs test?
Long time ago.
Good. So I've taken it several times, and I test pretty close to the same on 3 of the scores. In fact, Joni and I, when we were first together, I can't remember if we were married yet or not, but we took a class on listening where we with a bunch of other couples from the church. And so the instructor later on put us in rows. So on each of the different scales, there was one that's the introvert and extrovert scale. Now, I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm an extreme introvert. Okay, way off to the side over here. And Joni's exactly the opposite on extrovert. She's way over there. So there we are, we're waving down the line at each other. And then we get to the next scale and we literally did this, all right, way on the other side. But there's one scale where we're closer to the center, and that's the thinking feeling scale. Okay. And when the first few times I took that test, I always ended up on the thinking side. As I matured, I moved to the feeling side, which is where I think I am naturally, but I'd had a lot of training that helped me to move over to this side. And so as I was testing at first, it was my training that was speaking. And then I moved back to that other side. So is there a piece of you that has learned to hear in a certain way, learned to act in a certain way, or are you listening to what else can be drawn out of you? Do you have to only be, maybe talking about graven images, do you have to only be that image that you have carved into your soul, or are you more than just that? And even if it's true, like what I said about being very introverted, do I say that in order to say, and you can't change me? It means only this much. It's this is what describes me perfectly like this, or am I open to what else it can be?
One of the things that bedazzles me from older people is when they say, I've always been this way. And I think, why? And at some level, how have you survived being that way? That's risky business to stay one way for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I liked her line where she said, choose faith over fear.
Yes.
in this moment. I get that you've always been that way, and so it's easier to be that way, but is that what faith is calling you to?
I think it's a cop-out to say that. It's to me, it just stops the conversation then, because you're not allowing for anything else to come in or maybe come out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought this was a very meaty chapter, and I really did enjoy it, because just before that, in that same general region, she talked about building a positive and accurate sense of yourself. And I'm thinking that would be something we would want to be doing, throughout our life and over time. And doing things that would enhance that very, very self.
Mm-hmm.
And then she had these 5 questions, which I wrote down because I thought they were damn good ones to, what do I need to know? What do I need to accept? What do I need to try? What do I need to grieve? And what do I need to celebrate? That's pretty inclusive and all encompassing.
Right. And your answers today and your answers tomorrow ought to change in some ways.
Well,
right? And do you allow them to do that?
I think it's important for me, and one of the things that, when I've worked with other people is to say, we're changed in the moment. You and I, all of us here, are changed as we interact. So the person at the end of today's day, we are not the same that we were this morning, that we were a couple of hours ago, because hopefully something has been allowed to come out and something has been allowed to come in the interim.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't know until tomorrow if that's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Sometimes it felt really good to eat that whole pizza, and then you realize later on, maybe not the best of ideas, right? And it's that type of thing. And do we listen to the later on voice that helps us tomorrow to be different then? So Nancy, tell us about some more of your sections. She has several. We kind of assigned each other sections. So what else did you hear in some of your sections? Anything?
Well, I'm looking on page 121 on one of those try thises. Is that what you're talking about, Catherine?
Yeah, anything like that.
It says choose a topic on which you need guidance. And so it's like specific.
Yeah.
Pose your question and then listen for a response. Do not discount what you hear as just your imagination. Mm-hmm. After all, your imagination is a wonderful thing. So for me, minus the pandemic, I'm now retired, and that's kind of a whole new arena for me. And so I've been asking guidance. What am I supposed to do now? Because for so long, I always knew what I was going to do because it's all lined up, right, Judy? you
No
get to school.
Back.
Pardon?
No turning back.
Right. No turning back. But so I actually was asked to apply for a job to teach art and drama to first graders. And they said, oh, it's a dream job. You would be great for it. And I thought about it not very long, because I thought, oh gosh, I've been there, done that. And I don't want that commitment of every single day having to do that and not the other stuff I've already done, like the Hebrew Academy. I'm a sub there. Haven't done anything yet there, but I would have to say no to them after already applying and being on gear there. And then all these other little art classes and Canyon Ranch and stuff. So anyway, my answer was no, I'm not going to do that. But it didn't have to listen for very long was my point. But then you start thinking, well, what can you do? What else can you do? What is my imagination saying? And I'm still listening. I don't know yet. And
Mhm.
maybe tomorrow I'll come up with a better idea. But that is something I'm learning slowly but surely, is you don't have to have an answer right away. You can put it away and
Yeah.
come back to it the next day, and like just put it on the back burner, as they say,
Yeah.
back shelf, whatever.
Because having an answer all the time is my job. Not, I'm just kidding. It's easy to try to have that answer all the time, isn't it? But you can wait.
Oracle on the hill, the oracle on the hill. You're stuck with that now.
Yeah.
But the back to that oracle on the hill, the oracle in Greece, the real deal, when people would come to them with questions like, should we go to war or whatever, she would always give a question that was like, well, it could be yes, it could be no. And she didn't give an ultimate definitive answer. So it ended up that the person had to come up with their own answer on their own anyway.
Yeah.
I just found that kind of interesting.
Yeah. And oftentimes we seek for simple answers.
Mhm.
And life is more complex than that. Right? There's a children's book that Judy will know for sure, and Nancy, maybe you as well. It came from the French originally, Remy something, and it was What Good Luck, What Bad Luck. And it's all about how this thing happens and it looks like it's bad luck, but it turns into a good thing. And then that seems like good luck, but it turns into a bad thing, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. And everything that happened, everything that does happen in our life can have both good and bad implications. And do we hold on to it loosely, or do we, grab it with a firm fist and say it can't ever change?
Mhm.
That sense of openness is important. It was interesting for me to read the chapter on minister as listener,
Mhm.
because in that both people had kind of firm answers about how to listen, right? The one was, I always only listen within. Well, I'm not saying God doesn't live there, but sometimes the God voice is in the outside somehow, outside of my own self. And I need to listen to it, filtering it through the me. But how can I be open to?
So that's on page 135, minister as listener. So I have a question for you, Jim.
Yes.
When you set out to write your sermons, do you listen to what you're supposed to say that week, or do you put it on the back burner sometimes? And I mean, do you have probably a plethora of stories in a file cabinet and think, okay, this one will work for what I'm trying?
My wife would say that I put it on the back burner way too long, but I try to make it into a listening process. Let me just see if I can show you one thing so that you can see part of how I do things. Let me just get, this is,
that story about the limping horses and how the trainer was limp,
Yeah.
Does that come after your message, or does that story motivate a message?
Both. So let me show you what I do. Let me share my screen real quick, and maybe you can see part of what I do. Here's my blank commentary sheet. Okay. I put my title, I put this, I have all these things, and these are my points. And you can see I usually have 1, 2, 3, because those are what I think of as moves. Down here, I put the scripture. And one of the first things I'll do is I'll write the scripture. Did you see these 3 blank spaces? That's where I start placing thoughts. Sometimes it's thoughts that we've had in celebration team. Then look down here. This is all the junk, just ideas that have been there. And so I'll read through those and I'll say, oh, this thing might work. And I move them up to here as things come along, and I just fill them in like that. And they just make a grand list of ideas. And then I try to listen and say, which of these are the right ideas?
Hmm. Interesting.
So that it's not a linear process. It's a
Not at all.
circular listening process.
I don't quite get that. I didn't understand that that piece of paper you showed us. Did you women friends? I don't understand how that worked. What were those words? What were those words?
What words? All the
Well, you
all the
letters.
numbers and things?
Yeah, what was that?
They're just
I don't-
placeholders. That's just placeholders. So let me go back to it and I'll show it to you again.
Yeah, I didn't understand what those meant.
Hold on.
They don't mean anything. They're just there.
Yeah, they're just sitting there. So sorry.
It's not your matrix.
Yeah. This is just my way of trying to listen. Oh, where is it? Okay, there. So this is just N, O, M, C, C,
Yeah,
C.
what are those? What is
Nothing,
that?
nothing. None of it means anything. So as I figure out something, like right here, let's say that this part of Thomas 50 is listen to the cry of the crowd.
Oh,
Okay,
and then you replace it. I get it.
does that make sense? So
Yes.
here's this thing, and then when I find the place where it goes, I just put it in there.
Okay, I understand that better now.
So then
But
I
I didn't-
and I just move things around.
It's
And
kind of like a
sometimes-
weird diagramming.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Like
that's
diagramming
what
a
it is.
sentence, but you're
Yeah.
diagramming a whole sermon.
Sure. But what it's trying, I mean, this is just basic structure. If you just think of it as basically, see this first section right here, this
Yeah.
is just how do I introduce things? Well, actually, this line is for announcements. So this is just how do I introduce where I go from? What's my
Okay.
first move? You know, what's the first point, if you want to call it that? For me, I call them moves just because it's like a story. How does the story go from here to there? That it takes turns. And so
So
each
why is it like I would just go boom, 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 boom down? Yours goes like a dance. It goes out and in and out.
because it's
Why-
points and subpoints.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so listen to the cry of the crowd, I write here, and then the subpoint might be even Judy
Or Nancy.
or Nancy or whoever it happens to be, even
For
you know,
Catholic.
the challenging person to listen to, you know, whatever it happens to be.
Okay.
So I share that with you, not because it's a perfect thing, but that's part of my listening process. It's not an academic exercise, it's a creative exercise, and it's a listening exercise.
I like that. Did you learn that in seminary, how to do that? Or did you just come up with it?
I probably have some of the vestiges of what they taught me in seminary, but it's definitely my own, how I've learned to make it so that it works for me.
It's not dissimilar to what somebody might be doing to write music or score it, or what somebody who's doing a painting, like you, Nancy, what you want in the foreground and what needs to support it, or what you want to put over here somewhere.
Mhm.
It is a creative process.
That's right. And
So-
here's what I oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say that when I taught speech, I would have kids get 3x5 cards and put it on a bulletin board. And it's kind of the same thing, rearranging it. And you know, when I've watched these mystery movies, and when they're trying to solve a crime, they'll do that. They'll put stuff
Yeah,
up on the
yeah.
board, you know, and then, oh, look at the newspaper shows them here and whatever. But it's the same kind of overall, yeah, it's like, you know, a football coach, you know, when they do those deals.
Sure. So let me go back to the speech teacher.
It's a technical word.
No,
Sorry.
the speech teacher, the issue always for the speech teacher is they have to say, you've learned to do it only this way. Let me show a different way that you can say that you can use your mouth. And literally the you know, a speech teacher will teach that kid to hold their lips differently. right? And that's part of what you have to do is you have to learn to listen and hold your life differently and be willing to do that. Because the kid can go over there and say, no, I'm always going to say the way I want to say right? And if they do that, they'll always be less than the perfect communicator. If we can listen to each other, if we can listen to the voices that draw us forward, we'll get better. So let me real quickly, because we're running out of time, talk about the try thises. I thought, as opposed to last week where I thought there were several that kind of repeated the same story, I thought these were much richer. There was a lot of different ways to be able to do it. And the good news is you have 2 weeks to be able to practice this. Because remember that next week we don't have a class because there's a couple things happening during that Holy Week.
Easter.
All right. So remember that we'll go on, we'll meet next in 2 weeks. But here's some of the things. I liked the try this that said something along the lines of, don't discount things as just your imagination. And so look at the try this and say, where is it that I'm truly listening and not discounting my own voice?
And can I tag on to that, Jim?
Yes.
For Judy, because of what she said about going in the car to get out of the house, page 132, Judy, the try this is take yourself to an unusual location. And it doesn't have to be out of the country. It can simply be, in your case, into the car.
Yeah.
And see, how do you listen differently because of that? Now, she mentioned going to a library or a church, which we can't really do too well these days, but those are places eventually we can go to listen.
But you can always, for example, at St. Francis, you say you can't go to this church, but there's a whole lot of outdoor space here that you can go to.
Yeah.
And so where can you place yourself? Now, be careful because, okay, so one of her things said to slow your pace and listen for revelations. And slowing your pace can be done different ways, right? If you're always listening to silence, maybe you've heard everything that silence has to say right now, and you need to listen to noise, or vice versa. If you're very quick in your life, then you do need to stop. But if you're too slow of a life, maybe it's something louder, faster that you need to listen to.
Mhm.
This is about listening differently than what you have before. Okay. And so each of you is going to have to develop that yourself. She talked about one of the things was reading is a form of listening. But if you're always reading the same type of book, it might be that there's something else that needs to be listened to. Maybe for 5 days you practice reading the newspaper. Maybe you choose a different type of thing to listen to. Maybe you read Dr. Seuss books for 5 days, right? And so you try to say, where can I hear different than I have before? She also talked about how we listen by focusing on our life and noticing the hot spots, noticing the anxiety, one of the ones was about. So where is it that the worries and the problems are, so that you focus more directly on some of those things? And then there was the one that I thought was very intriguing. She essentially said to listen to how you have defined God before.
Yeah.
That list 5 traits of God.
Mhm.
And then think about which ones shouldn't be held on to the same. Because, so for example, how many kind of heard the onward Christian soldier God, the God who leads us into war, and you heard that somewhere in your childhood, and so you think of God being that defender of, and especially when we couple it sometimes to all powerful. And so we say, well, that means that God's going to defeat all my enemies. And one of the great things about seminary for me was it gave me a different definition of all powerful. But I had to listen to it because that other was there, but I had to be able to hear, can powerful be the one who doesn't beat the enemy in battle, but the one that is always at work changing things?
Mhm.
A different all powerful.
And I just want to mention before we leave, next chapter 4, what you'll read in the next week or so, listening to Beyond the Veil. And that is, listening to people that are long gone in physical form. But, with Easter and Jesus and resurrection, you might want to listen to what does Jesus have to say these days? What's up for you that way? Yeah, that's all I needed to say.
So this week, as you these next 2 weeks, and maybe you take this next week, the week before Easter, to redo these. Try this from this week, where you listen to the way you're listening, right? Where you rehear the voice of yourself in the midst of it all, and then move into the next chapter and do the try this from that after Easter and see what gets resurrected out of that. But just take some time to hear your voice, because here's what I know, looking at the 3 brilliant, wise women in front of me. You all have incredible things to be able to speak. I hear them. The question is do you hear them? And not just the voice that you've always listened to in your life, but how about the other voices that are speaking? The other voices of you. Do you hear them? Do you allow them to have a voice? Because if you don't listen to it, how can you ever know it well enough to gift it to any of the rest of us? Any last words before we go? All right, my friends. Thank you very much for listening. We will see you.
Thank you. Thank you,
so
Jim.
much.
Or it might just be possible that sometime this next week you end up being in some kind of a Zoom room with me.
Yeah, tonight, Lent, 7 o'clock.
Tonight again,
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So come
I
in,
want to hear that horse with the.
and enjoy, what I'm calling Monday Fool's Day. They tell me I'm not supposed to use that term, but Monday, Thursday falls on April Fools. So.
Oh, I get it. Mike said to say he dropped off the book.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Take
Bye,
care,
y'all.
everyone.
Have a great
Bye.
day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.